They do not rage. They do not dominate the room. They do not issue demands or make their superiority obvious. They do not leave you feeling crushed in the way you might expect from someone who is damaging you. What they do is far more difficult to detect. They suffer, quietly, persistently, with a quality of pain that feels genuine, that pulls at something deep in you every single time you encounter it. They seem fragile in a way that makes you want to protect them, sensitive in a way that makes every challenge feel like cruelty, wounded in a way that keeps you circling back, wondering if you have done enough, wondering if you could be doing more. And the cruelty of it, the specific cruelty of this subtype, is that their suffering is the mechanism. It is not the result of the dynamic. It is the engine of it. This is the vulnerable narcissist. And this video is about why psychologists and researchers now consider this to be the most dangerous subtype of all. Before we go further, let us be precise about what we are talking about, because the word narcissist is used broadly, and the differences between subtypes matter enormously for understanding what you are dealing with. The overt narcissist, sometimes called the grandiose narcissist, is the version most people picture. Loud, dominant, openly self-important. They move through the world with an air of entitlement that is rarely concealed. The damage they cause tends to be visible because they do not hide the fact that they believe the world should revolve around them. The covert narcissist, the focus of this entire channel, operates in the opposite register. The entitlement is the same. The need for admiration is the same. The fundamental inability to sustain genuine empathy is the same. But the expression of all of it is muted, internal, and dressed in the language of sensitivity and suffering rather than dominance and demand. The vulnerable narcissist is a specific expression of the covert pattern. In the clinical literature, vulnerability refers not to genuine fragility, but to a particular psychological architecture, a profound sensitivity to perceived criticism, a chronic orientation toward feeling wronged, and a self-image that is built around being someone who suffers rather than someone who dominates. The reason researchers consider this subtype dangerous is not because they are the most aggressive. It is because they are the hardest to identify, and therefore the hardest to leave. Here is the central thing to understand about the vulnerable narcissist's suffering. It is not fabricated in the way that deliberate lying is fabricated. This distinction matters, because if you are in this dynamic and you hear the phrase performed suffering, you may immediately push back. You may say, but their pain seems real. And the answer to that is, it often is real, in the sense that they experience it genuinely. What makes it narcissistic is not that the feeling is fake. It is that the feeling serves a function that genuine vulnerability does not. Genuine vulnerability is directional. When someone who is not narcissistic suffers, they tend to move toward resolution. They accept comfort and then release it. They acknowledge care and then reciprocate it. They move through the pain rather than inhabiting it indefinitely. The vulnerable narcissist's suffering does not resolve. It does not move toward anything. Instead, it creates a permanent gravitational field around them that keeps everyone in their orbit oriented toward their emotional state. Are they okay? What do they need? What did you do or not do that might have contributed to how they are feeling right now? The suffering keeps the focus where the narcissistic personality requires it, on them. And crucially, it keeps the people around them in a posture of permanent caregiving, a posture that leaves very little space to notice that the dynamic is extracting something from you even as it presents itself as need. One of the most important things to understand about this subtype is what their vulnerability protects them from. Think about what happens in a relationship with a vulnerable narcissist when you try to raise a concern. When you say, "This is not working for me." When you try to name something that has been building. When you need, just once, for the conversation to be about what you are experiencing rather than what they are enduring. What follows is rarely argument. It is rarely defensiveness in the obvious sense. What happens instead is that your concern, the thing you brought into the room, disappears. It gets replaced by their pain, their distress at being questioned, their quiet devastation at the implication that they have not been enough. And within minutes, you are no longer the person with the unmet need. You are the person who caused the pain. You are managing their response to your concern rather than having your concern addressed. You are apologizing for raising it. This is the accountability shield at work. The vulnerable narcissist's suffering functions as an almost perfect defense against being held responsible for anything. Because you cannot place demands on someone who is already overwhelmed. You cannot challenge someone who is visibly hurting. To do so feels cruel, and they rely on that feeling with extraordinary precision. Over time, this creates a relationship in which one person's needs are consistently addressed and the other person's needs consistently disappear. Not through explicit refusal, through the gentle, persistent, inescapable weight of the other person's fragility. The reason the vulnerable narcissist is so difficult to identify is that every cultural script we have about narcissism describes the opposite of what they look like. We are taught that narcissists are arrogant. The vulnerable narcissist appears humble, even self-deprecating. We are taught that narcissists are grandiose. The vulnerable narcissist seems to genuinely struggle with their own worth. We are taught that narcissists lack empathy. The vulnerable narcissist speaks the language of emotional sensitivity so fluently that they often seem like the most emotionally attuned person in the room. And so when the relationship begins to feel wrong, when you start to notice the exhaustion, the constant management, the way your own needs keep not quite making it to the surface, you do not reach for the word narcissist. That word does not match the person you are living with. You reach for other explanations. They have anxiety. They have been through a great deal. They are still healing from things that happened before you. And you are probably right that all of those things are true. What is also true, and what takes much longer to see, is that those things are not the cause of the dynamic. They're the costume it wears. The clinical research on this subtype has found that covert or vulnerable narcissism is consistently harder for both partners and clinicians to identify than the grandiose form. The suffering presentation activates care systems in the people around them that suppress scrutiny. You do not interrogate someone who is hurting. You help them, and in the helping, you lose track of whether you are being helped in return. There is a specific quality to the way a vulnerable narcissist engages with your emotions that is worth examining very carefully, because it mimics genuine empathy, so closely that distinguishing the two is genuinely difficult. When you are distressed, they respond. They come close. They say the right things. They appear to feel what you are feeling. For a moment, sometimes for an extended period, it seems as though they truly understand. But watch what happens next. Watch how quickly your distress becomes a segue into theirs. Watch how the conversation that began with your pain ends with their pain. Watch how the comfort they offer always circles back to something they need from you. Reassurance, acknowledgement, confirmation that they are a good partner, a good person, that they are enough. This is not empathy. This is empathy-shaped attention extraction. The movement is always in one direction, even when it appears bidirectional on the surface. They respond to your vulnerability not primarily to support you, but to position themselves as someone who supports you, which is a different thing entirely. And the distinction only becomes visible over time, in the accumulated pattern, not in any single exchange. People who have been in long-term relationships with a vulnerable narcissist tend to describe a particular kind of depletion that is different from the depletion produced by other difficult relationships. It is not the depletion of combat. It is not the exhaustion of repeated open conflict. It is quieter than that, and in some ways harder to recover from, because it accrues without landmarks. There is no single moment you can point to and say, that is when things went wrong. There are only years of small redirections, years of your needs quietly evaporating before they could be spoken, years of being the steady one, the capable one, the person who holds things together for someone who never quite develops the capacity to hold things together themselves. What this costs specifically is a relationship with your own needs. After years of subordinating them, after years of learning that raising them produces pain in someone you love, you stop raising them. And then gradually, you stop knowing what they are. Your own interior life becomes secondary to the management of someone else's. And that is a loss that goes very deep. Many people who have come out of these relationships describe not only grief for the relationship, but grief for themselves. For the version of them that went in, for the years, for the things they did not pursue because the relationship absorbed everything. That grief is legitimate, and it is important to name it, because without naming it, the recovery cannot address the thing that was actually lost. For many people in this dynamic, there is a specific moment, or a series of small moments, when the pattern becomes impossible to explain away. It is often not dramatic. It is rarely a revelation in the cinematic sense. It tends to be something quiet, a conversation in which you observe, clearly and without the usual emotional interference, how quickly the focus moved away from you. A situation in which their fragility appears and disappears with a precision that does not quite match genuine fragility. a moment in which they manage something with perfect competence for themselves that they have consistently been unable to manage when you were available to manage it for them. And in that moment something shifts. Not into anger necessarily, not immediately, but into a different quality of attention. You begin watching the pattern rather than living inside it. And once you begin watching it, you cannot stop seeing it. This is the moment the vulnerable narcissist system becomes visible as a system. And it is important, if you are in it, to know that this recognition is not betrayal. It is not cruelty toward someone who is genuinely struggling. It is an accurate perception of something that has been arranged to resist accurate perception. You are not being unkind by seeing clearly. You are simply, finally, seeing. Recognition changes the dynamic in ways that are uncomfortable before they become clarifying. When you stop absorbing the suffering without examination, when you begin to hold a gentle, internal distance from the gravitational pull of their fragility, the system responds. The suffering often intensifies before it recedes. The fragility becomes more urgent. The implicit accusation that you are failing them becomes more pronounced. This escalation is not evidence that you were wrong to see what you saw. It is evidence that the pattern depended on your not seeing it. Your changed response disrupts something that was working, from their perspective, extremely well. What comes after that disruption varies. In some relationships, there is a renegotiation, a genuine one, if the person is capable of it and willing to engage with what has been happening. In many relationships, what comes instead is a long, quiet confirmation that the pattern was what you thought it was, because it cannot survive being seen. Either way, what you find on the other side of recognition is yourself. The version of you that was there before you learned to make yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's need. That version has not gone anywhere. It has been waiting. If this video has named something you have been trying to find words for, something you felt but could not quite articulate, then stay with that for a moment. The vulnerable narcissist is the subtype most likely to make you doubt your own perception. The one most likely to make you feel that naming the dynamic is itself an act of cruelty. The one most likely to make you the villain in the story of your own experience. You are not the villain. You are someone who cared deeply and consistently, for a person whose architecture was built to receive care without returning it. That is not a character flaw. That is what happened to your empathy in a relationship that required all of it and gave very little back. In the next video, we are going deeper into one of the most important mechanisms in all of narcissistic abuse, the one that explains why leaving is so much harder than it looks from the outside, and why you can know exactly what is happening to you and still not be able to walk away. It is called trauma bonding, and understanding it will change the way you think about every relationship pattern we have explored on this channel. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. And if this video gave you something, a word for something you have been carrying, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.